Okay, today is Baomer, and it's a day of tremendous revelation of godliness. The Zohar says today is Atika da Atika. It's the highest of the high, and yet, the same time as it being the highest of the high, it also comes down to the lowest of the low. It impacts the world. As it says in Tanya in general, that in the passing of the day of the passing of the tzaddik goes up to a high new place, and from this high new place, his Peil Yeshus Kadev brings salvation in the earth. But this is by every tzaddik, and the day of the Shem Yochai is unique. It's a unique kind of blessing and salvation that there is no other day that has this. So to understand this a little bit more, let's look at um, this week's Torah portion, where we see also this idea of a unique blessing that comes down from a very high place, which is a very low place. This Torah portion talks about the reward Hashem gives us for keeping the Torah and the mitzvahs. And in the middle of the blessings that Hashem gives the Jewish people, there is a verse that says, Ufanise aleichem, I will turn to you, and I will multiply you. So Rashi says on this verse, what does it mean I will turn to you? I will turn away from all of my other business, and I will take care of it, and I will reward you. And Rashi gives a parable of the king who hires workers. This parable that Rashi brings comes from Torah's Kohanim, and Rashi merely says, if a parable for this is in the Torah's Kohanim, look over there, etc. King hires workers. So, question is this: number one, this is not the first time that Rashi says this kind of thing of Hashem turning away from all of his other affairs to take care of something. Rashi says this about, for example, when a person offers his child to the idol Molech, and Rashi, they're talking about the opposite of a reward. There Rashi says, Hashem says, I will turn away from my own other affairs, and I will give the opposite of a blessing to the person who does this. So here it's not the first time that Rashi needs to translate this word or bring down this concept of Hashem turning away from everything else and dealing with the Jewish people. So why is it that here Rashi needs to give a parable? Question number two is, what's added by the parable? A king who hires workers. What is the addition that we see in the parable that's not understood from the concept itself? A person turns away from everything else and takes care of one individual. We can understand the idea. And if we don't understand the idea, what's added by the example of a king? What does that parable add that we don't know? And also, why does Rashi say a king? Any person can hire a worker. Why does Rashi say specifically a king? So this verse actually seems to be a little easier to understand than the verses before where Rashi brings the same concept. In the other verses, the word the Torah uses, that Rashi wants to explain, is panai, my face. Hashem says, I'll turn my face to this person who offers his child to the idol Molech. So Rashi says the word face means my time, my attention. I'll turn my attention upon this person. But here the Torah doesn't even use the word face. Here the Torah says, I will turn to the person. Ufanisi aleichem. Not I will give my face to this person. In the other verse it says, I will give my face, I'll give my attention. Here it says, Ufanisi, I will turn. That obviously connotes this meaning, obviously can contain then that phrase, is this idea of turning away from everything else and focusing on something specific. So why is it that specifically in this verse, Rashi needs to give us a parable, and what is added by this parable? Again, we can understand this without the parable, and it doesn't seem the parable really adds much. So one explanation is this. Hashem has other business. What does that mean? Hashem is turning away from his regular business, and then he does something unique, and he stops his regular business, and he focuses on rewarding the Jewish people. What is his other business? So if we were to talk about one individual, like in the other Torah portions, so then you could say Hashem turns away from everyone else, and he focuses on this person. But in this Torah portion, it says, I will turn to the Jewish people. So this seems to be part of Hashem's regular business. Hashem's business. Hashem is involved in rewarding the Jewish people. So what does it mean that Hashem turns away from his other business to reward the Jewish people? That this is his business. This is what he does. That's what Hashem does. He rewards the Jewish people. That this is he's not into Geico or anything, right? So I can do all those things in one. It can do it all. Yes, Hashem is infinite. When the Hashem learn later, what does it mean to turn away? What does it mean to turn? But to pay attention, doesn't need to turn away. But we'll hold that question. But the question more over here right now is, what's the meaning of Hashem turning away from A to get to B, turning away from his other business to do this, all of his business to do this? Isn't this his business? Isn't it the business of Hashem? Isn't that what he's interested in rewarding the Jewish people? Isn't that his thing? So if you look in the Torah's Kohanim, the full parable reads this. There was a king who hired workers, and he has many workers. And there was one worker who did far greater work than everybody else. So it came the time to pay the workers. All the workers come into the king and they want to get rewarded. The king says to that worker, you need to come in after. First, let me take care of everyone else who didn't just do a job like you did. And then I will reward you separately. So in a similar way, the Medrash says, besides the Jewish people deserving a reward for Hashem, nations of the world also deserve a reward for keeping their mitzvahs. And therefore, the Medrash uses the words, a king who hires many workers. The Medrash mentions specifically we're talking about a king, and it mentions many workers. A regular person hires few workers, but the multitude of workers that are in Hashem's employment, only Hashem can do. It's analogous to a king. So since we're talking about there being many, many workers, so therefore the Medrash uses this analogy of a king to help us understand that this is how it is with Hashem, that Hashem has a reward he gives the nations of the world in this world. Everyone's coming to Hashem to get rewarded, the Jewish people and Lahavdil, the nations of the world. So Hashem tells the Jewish people, I can't give you your full reward in this world. I'm going to give the reward to nations of the world in this world. But for you, your unique reward will be in the future. That's something which is beyond the reward that's limited. I can't give you your reward in this world. It's limited. So that seems to answer the all of our questions. We understand why he uses it, why we need a parable. We understand why you need a parable of a king and workers. But the question is this. If that's what Rashi meant, then Rashi should have said the whole parable. Rashi should have said a parable of a king who hired many workers, and instead Rashi doesn't bring the whole parable. He just says a parable of a king who hires workers. It seems like from Rashi that he's not talking about the Jewish people and their reward in the face of the nations of the world. If that's what he meant, he should have brought the whole parable. That's the source of Rashi does say that. But it seems like that from Rashi, that Rashi has something else in mind. And the question is, what does Rashi have in mind? And we have to understand also, based on that, what Rashi needs a parable for in order to bring out this other point that he has. What's Rashi's question? It can't be this is Rashi's question. So the answer is this. People who aren't part of a country have certain obligations to the country. They have obligations to the king. So when a regular person hires workers, it makes sense. You hire workers because they don't owe anything to you. So why should they work for you? You have to pay them. But a king, people who have to work for the king, why do they work for the king? Because they have an obligation to work for the king. So why is it the king has to hire workers in the first place? What's the point meaning of a king hiring workers? King shouldn't have to hire workers. A person has to hire workers. Even a minister, a top minister has to hire workers. But a king, everyone is subservient. They have an obligation to the king, obligation to the country. So the fact the king has to hire workers, what that means is that the king is not asking his subjects to do regular work, regular jobs. Rather, he's asking his servants to do something beyond what regular servants would have to do for their country. He's asking his people to do something beyond them, something which is beyond the regular kind of obligation. And that's why he has to hire them, he has to pay them. He's asking to do something more. And this is what Rashi is giving us with this parable of the king. That the king hires workers, when we're talking about not just a regular kind of devotion of people towards their king, but people doing something far more. And that's what Rashi says in the very beginning of the sixth Torah portion. Rashi says in Bechukotai Leichel, Rashi says, what am I asking you? Hashem says, I want you to work hard in the study of Torah. I'm not just asking you to study Torah. I'm asking you to exert yourself, to work hard, to sweat, to give it your all. There is the reward Hashem gives the Jewish people for keeping Torah mitzvahs in a regular way. But then there's a unique reward for a Jew serving Hashem beyond what the law requires, beyond what his limits are. Like the Gemara says famously about the donkey rental they had in those days. You know about the donkey rental? Gemara? No? The Gemara had this. It wasn't there. So Gemara talks about how if you want to rent a donkey to go a distance of 10 parsa, you would pay you pay a zuz, one zuz to go 10 parsa, 10 miles, whatever. You want to go 11 miles, it costs double as much. Why? Because beyond the nature of the donkey to go so far. It's 1 mile more, it costs so much more, it costs twice as much. In a similar way, the Gemara says it was natural for everyone in that time to learn everything they learned in Torah 100 times. Whenever they went before their teacher, the students in the time of the Talmud before their teacher, and they taught them something new, they would review it 100 times. The Gemara says that all those who review it 100 times, they're called people who do not serve Hashem. Everyone does it 100 times. Hitchi, it's nothing. But the guy who does it 101 times, that's considered someone who is a servant of Hashem. So in a similar way, this Torah portion is talking about the service of Hashem in a real way. You're lifting up your sleeves, like the yeshiva students preparing the float for Baomer. My son was telling me how he has to come to Pico at 6 o'clock in the morning to help prepare the float. And he had to come to Pico last night at 1 o'clock in the morning. And he wasn't finished when I spoke to him at 2 o'clock. So these guys are working hard. So Hashem has one kind of reward for a servant of Hashem who's working on a regular way. And then there's a servant of Hashem, a real servant of Hashem, where there's different kind of reward. So that's why the Torah first it says, I'll give you rain in its season, the earth will give its produce. And then in the middle of Hashem giving all the blessings, Hashem says, I'll turn to you. Why does Hashem say, I'll turn to you? If Hashem wants to talk about the reward, he should have started either beginning of the Torah portion should say, I'll turn to you and I'll give you a reward, or the end of the Torah portion, I'll turn to you. Why does it say in the middle of the Torah portion, I will turn to you? The answer is that there are two kinds of reward. There is a regular kind of reward for serving Hashem in a limited way. Then there's the unique reward that Hashem turns to us and gives us far more than he would give if we just served him in a limited way. That's why in the middle of the Torah portion, after it says a couple of verses of blessing, then it says, okay, that's what would happen if you didn't serve Hashem in a high level. But if you serve Hashem beyond your nature, then Hashem says, I will turn to you. It's something new. And that's what Rashi says, like a king who hires workers. It's about a person serving Hashem beyond what a subject of the king would have to do for the king. Something higher and something beyond. Okay, so now we answered our questions. We understand now why we need an example of the king, and we understand why this verse needs to be uniquely explained. I will turn to you. That's something we don't see in the other places where Rashi mentioned the concept of Hashem turning towards someone. Here it's something unique that Hashem is turning towards a Jew who is doing something beyond what the law requires. Now, we have to understand, though, what are the specific blessings the Torah gives us here that show it's a unique reward. So the next line, next verse, after I will turn to you, says, V'hefreisi, I will make you multiply. Rashi says, Pru you'll have children. Which, by the way, like Baomer, is a special day for blessing for children. So that's the word in this week's Torah portion. Today's Chumash. V'hefreisi, I'll bless you, Pru You'll be fruitful and you will multiply. So it's interesting. In this word, V'hefreisi, Rashi mentions two things. You'll be fruitful and multiply. Back in the first Torah portion, Rashi says that there's two different blessings. Through Ruvu. There's one blessing to have one child, another blessing to have many children. And here Rashi says in the same word, V'hefreisi, it means to be fruitful and to multiply. And so The answer is, based upon what we learned, that this is talking about a unique kind of blessing. The beginning of this of the Torah is talking about a blessing that God gives to all people. God gives a blessing and a commandment to all people to have children. You could have one child, could have many children, but the unique blessing that the Jewish people have is not just that you have many children, but that in the one child you have, that child will continue and go on. It's possible to have a child who can't have children. The blessing v'freisi is that Hashem blesses your child to also have children. Not just you'll have a child, but your child will have children. So in the initial blessing of having a child, Hashem includes in that an infinite blessing. In Bereshis, Hashem is talking about two kinds of blessings, of quantity, of having one, of having many, something that exists by nations of the world as well. The blessing, the unique blessing Hashem gives the Jewish people is that your children will have children. And this is something, I guess, which includes your children will find someone to marry, and their children will have children too. So that's the include v'freisi. The next blessing, v'hirbesi, I'll cause you to multiply. Rashi says, what does that mean? That means you'll walk upright. You'll go with koima skufa. You'll go with pride. It doesn't mean only that you'll stand upright. The code of Jewish law talks about how you're supposed to posture yourself. It means the Jewish people will not just have the blessing that God gave to Yaakov. Yaakov was blessed by his father, V'rav Yavetzoyer, that his older brother will serve him. But the Jewish people won't just have the blessing of being taken care of by nations of the world and them serving them, but b'koim skufa, they'll have this pride, they'll have this strength, they'll have this courage, they'll have this greatness beyond just that the nations of the world be subservient to them in some way, but b'koim skufa, with great pride and joy. Like with this, that's the purpose actually of the parade. The parade is meant to bring out Jewish pride. These kids could carry a sign. I put on tefillin, I keep Shabbos. That's what it's about. So what's left to explain is this. Let's go back now to what you asked before. Hashem turns away from his whole business to take care of the Jewish people. What is his business? Why are we saying, isn't it his business to take care of the Jewish people? What else does he do? I mean, he does everything. He creates the whole world. But why isn't it part of his business? Why isn't taking care of the Jewish people his business? And the answer is this. Business is not you. Business is something you get involved in. There's you and there's your business. If you don't know this, then hopefully your spouse reminds you, right? This is your business. Now you're home, So when same is also, so to speak, for Hashem. There is the way Hashem contracts his light and creates the world and gets involved with the creation. And there's the way Hashem is in his very essence. The way Hashem is not the way Hashem contracts his light. So the kind of reward Hashem gives ordinarily for a person keeping Torah mitzvahs in a regular way, that's considered part of the business of Hashem, so to speak. So the way Hashem contracts his light and gives a reward that's connected to the world, that's connected to creation, it's limited. But then there is a unique blessing that Hashem gives the Jewish people because they serve Hashem beyond their nature. That's not called a business. That's called how Hashem is in himself. Not the way Hashem contracts his light, the way Hashem limits himself, but that's when Hashem contracts his light and limits himself and rewards us based upon our merits. That's called his business. When we talk about Hashem giving the Jewish people a unique reward because they give their all to serve Hashem, that's not business. That's Hashem himself. That's how as the Zohar says, Rabbi Shimon Yochai says, the Jew and the Torah and Hashem are one. When a Jew devotes himself to Hashem, he not just connects to Hashem in Hashem's business state, but the way Hashem is in his very essence. But the question is, getting back to what we started with the unique quality of Baomer, if it's such a lofty and high thing, we're talking about Hashem in his very essence, then why does the Torah talk about such physical things? You'll have this, you'll have your vineyard, you'll have your wheat, you'll have your oil. Why is it talking about wheat and oil and vineyard if it's talking about Hashem's essence? It shouldn't be talking about wheat, oil, and vineyard. If it's talking about Hashem's essence, then it shouldn't be talking about physical things. It should be talking about spiritual things. And the answer is the opposite. The opposite. If it's something which is limited to the spiritual, it doesn't reach the physical, then that shows it's not infinite. Infinite means that it pervades everything. It affects all of the physical reality as well. Let's say by ourselves. When you're a little bit happy, you smile. When you're really happy, you're not just happy in your mind and your heart. You dance. You get up and dance. When something touches your very core, it affects your totality of who you are. It affects everything that affects your whole being. So too, because Hashem is turning to the Jew who is devoted to Him beyond what the law requires, therefore the blessing is not just a blessing which is limited to the spiritual and stays in some spiritual plane. It's infinite. And because it's infinite, it comes down to the physical world. In the language of the Zohar, it comes from Atika, the Atika comes from the highest of the high, and it comes down Betoiv and Nidav and Nigla. It comes down in an open and revealed way in the physical world. And perhaps this is connected with Rabbi Shimon Yochai's final teaching, one of his final teachings the day of his passing. Rabbi Shimon Yochai said that right before he passed away, Kol Yomai, my life that I was connected to this world, I was connected to Hashem. And I never understood the pasuk, never understood the verse, Hashem tisal nafsh, my soul glories in Hashem. What does it mean? My soul glories in Hashem. What does that even mean? So he said, but now I understand what it means. Because now he said, my neshama is one with Him, my neshama is inflamed with Him, my neshama cleaves to Him. My neshama is one with Him, it's inflamed with Him, it cleaves to Him. Now I know what it means. So there is a way of serving Hashem in a regular way. Then there is Be'achida, where you feel this fire and passion of oneness with Hashem. And that's a unique quality of service of Hashem that we get through studying the inner dimension of Torah. When you study Chassidus, the inner parts of Torah, it brings out in yourself the inner part of your neshama. That is Be'achida. And this causes also the response from Hashem also, that Hashem responds to Israel also from the essence of Hashem. And therefore the bracha, the blessing, is uniquely in the physical world in an open and clear way. Because it's coming from the essence of Hashem, therefore it affects the world immediately and in an open and clear way, that we should see the blessing of Hashem in an open and clear way. The coming Mashiach Tzekenu on the day of Baomer today, we should celebrate immediately with Mashiach Tzekenu and Shimba Yochai. Take care, Mamish. Chaim. Thank you. Thank you.